This week in my home state of Illinois, President Trump deployed the Texas National Guard over the objection of our governor. To my Republican colleagues, how would you react if a Democratic president deployed the National Guard from any state into your state over the objections of your governor? Imagine masked Border Patrol agents in military tactical gear marching through your state's largest city. As a top Border Patrol official bragged, the agents were arresting people based on, quote, how they look. Imagine if federal agents rappelled from Black Hawk helicopters to swarm an apartment building in your state, breaking down doors, yanking people out of bed, zip tying and detaining U.S. citizens, your constituents, including children for ours, including American citizens. Imagine if federal agents pointed an assault rifle at one of your constituents, simply taking a picture. If they fired pepper balls at a minister who was praying on the street and a reporter who was simply driving past a protest site doing her job. Imagine if they tear gassed not just peaceful protesters in your community, but local law enforcement. This is the reality in my home state of Illinois at this moment. I don't believe a single one of us finds it tolerable to consider the conduct of this administration toward my state. Let me be clear. What's happening in my state of Illinois is unprecedented, unnecessary, and an unlawful abuse of power that should offend all of us. Oh, there goes that Democratic senator again. He must hate Donald Trump. Well, I can tell you there was a press conference before the National Guard arrived, called by the business leaders in my state, condemning the delegation of the Guard to Illinois. In deploying the National Guard to my state, President Trump has disregarded our Constitution's system of federalism embodied in the 10th Amendment, which reserves powers to the state that are not expressly delegated to the federal government. That used to be a common question from the Republican side. Now, radio silence. Chicago does not need, quote, be saved, as Kash Patel claimed in a tweet yesterday. We need the federal government to stop engaging in political theater and baselessly, recklessly escalating a situation in Illinois. Don't take it just from me. According to a sworn statement by Thomas Mills, police chief in Broadview, Illinois, DHS agents told the Broadview police that DHS would bring a, quote, excuse me for saying it, shit show to Broadview, including increased use of tear gas and pepper spray. Chief Mills said, quote, over the course of my career in law enforcement, the way in which federal agents have indiscriminately used chemical agents in Broadview is unlike anything I've seen before. This committee claims to support the police. Where is our concern for police officers in my state who are being tear gassed and prevented from protecting the communities they serve? I also want to address another issue, and that was a hearing this week with the Attorney General. This week, I asked the Attorney General a simple question. What is the legal basis for the deployment of the National Guard in Illinois? Think that question was out of line? Obviously, she did. She refused to answer. Instead, she launched irrelevant and baseless personal attacks against me. She said my question proved that I hated Donald Trump, asking what the legal basis was for sending National Guard troops to my state. She suggested I was influenced by donations from a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Reid Hoffman. She used his name. Well, I checked my staff records. I've never received a dime from Mr. Hoffman, have no idea who he is. It was just a talking point to avoid answering my question. The Attorney General stonewalling in response to the most basic oversight questions was not limited to me. Instead of answers, she responded to legitimate questions with prepared attacks and smears on other Democratic senators. None of my Republican colleagues would ever accept such contempt from a Democratic administration. As I said then and say again, I've been a member of this committee for more than 20 years. Never have I encountered a witness from any other administration, Democrat or Republican, responding to legitimate questions from these types of personal attacks. This administration is trampling over the separation of powers. Do we hear anything from the other side of the dais? We cannot allow the disrespect the Attorney General has shown for this committee's constitutional oversight authority to continue. Let me say on a personal note, too, it was my honor to be the chairman of this committee for 4 years. I tried to be fair. There were a couple times when things broke down. The 2-hour rule was imposed in situations that I thought was unfair. We have never done that to you, but it was done to me several times. I tried to work things out and be fair. And let me tell you how I ran the clock, and I really say to the newer members of the committee, I hope you'll hear me when I say this. The 5-minute standard is a good one, and the chairman Grassley is trying to impose it, as I did too. My standard approach was to give people 5 minutes, tap the gavel, and at 6 minutes, vocally interrupt them. That was the way I worked at 6 minutes. And if they were in the middle of a question, I let them finish. That's not unreasonable. In fact, I think it's fair. I hope you'll consider the same standard when you preside. Chairman Grassley, I urge you to work with us to press this administration to provide substantive answers to our legitimate oversight questions. Otherwise, why are we here? I did that for you and your Republican colleagues when I was chair, and I hope you'll do the same.
What Senator Dick Durbin said from the floor wasn't theater. It was a demand for basic accountability. He described federal agents rappelling from Black Hawk helicopters, zip-tying people in their homes, tear-gassing peaceful protesters and even local police, and a federal deployment that ignored the governor of Illinois. Those aren't anecdotes or partisan talking points. Those are actions that cut to the question of whether federal power is being used to intimidate a city rather than to keep it safe. Multiple reports and the senator's own attempts at oversight show that members of Congress were denied entry to the Broadview ICE facility and have been shut out of the very operations Congress funds and should be able to inspect. Durbin's fury is understandable because oversight exists for a reason. If an agency believes its tactics are lawful and effective, it should welcome scrutiny. The opposite has happened. Access blocked, lawyers stonewalling, and officials offering evasions instead of legal justifications. When local law enforcement leaders, the people who actually run police departments day to day, say federal agents promised a show involving increased use of chemical agents, that's not just rhetoric. It's a sworn concern from people on the ground about tactics and escalation. Those are the same chiefs Durbin invoked, and their statements call for serious review. There's also a constitutional dimension here that goes beyond one raid or one precinct. The deployment of the National Guard, whether under state control or federalized, is governed by established law and custom precisely to prevent the federal government from using troops to police American cities arbitrarily. The very fact that governors and local leaders objected, then saw troops and federal agents show up anyway, raises questions about federalism and the proper limits of executive power. Federalizing forces into a state without clear public legal justification invites a dangerous precedent. If the executive can override state objection to make a political point, the balance of our federal system is at risk. Recent court activity shows judges are already being asked to weigh in on whether such deployments are legal, and not surprisingly, courts are scrutinizing this use of force closely. But legality is only one layer, legitimacy is another. Durbin pointed to the human fallout, families terrified, worshipers and clergy denied access to minister to detainees, journalists and local officers targeted while trying to document events. The visuals, masked officers without clear insignia, protesters facing chemical agents, are not just upsetting on an ethical level, they break public trust. When trust is lost, cooperation that makes neighborhoods safe erodes. Businesses post warnings on doors, residents hide, public events feel perilous. That's not the effect of a well-run public safety operation. That's the effect of a campaign of intimidation. Local business leaders and community groups have publicly condemned these tactics, and protests at Broadview have continued even as officials attempt to manage the optics. Then there's the conduct of oversight hearings themselves. Durbin's complaint about Attorney General Pam Bondi's responses matters because Congress's power to ask questions and demand answers is a foundational check on the executive. When Bondi was asked to explain the legal basis for these deployments and instead responded with personal attacks and talking points, that was not a defensive policy, it was a dodge. Multiple outlets reported that Bondi repeatedly declined to answer oversight questions, and senators on both sides noted the unusual tone and tactics in her hearing performance. When an attorney general substitutes smears for legal rationale, it does not reassure the public. It further undermines confidence in a process meant to be transparent and accountable. Finally, this moment is instructive about the mechanics of power. Political theater can be launched quickly. Legal remedies and oversight take time. Judges and advocacy groups are already litigating some of these deployments, and courts have begun to issue limitations and injunctions in response to legal challenges. But hearings and lawsuits are only half the answer. public pressure matters. When senators like Durbin and Duckworth make a public case, when clergy and community groups raise their voices, when local officials record sworn statements about operational tactics, that collective accountability forces the issue into the light. The question now is whether we will treat those facts as grounds for meaningful reform, clearer rules about federal deployments, stricter ID and conduct requirements for federal agents operating on American streets, and enforceable oversight for facilities holding detainees. The alternative is normalization, a world where federal agents can operate without meaningful transparency or local consent.
That is the real threat Durbin was warning about. If you find this alarming and you think government should be accountable to the people it serves, keep this conversation alive. Share the clip, demand answers from your representatives, and subscribe so we can keep tracking the legal filings, oversight requests, and court decisions that will decide whether constitutional safeguards hold. Democracy depends on citizens who refuse to look away.